In September, I attended to a funeral. Oh, but don't be sad. It's actually been one of the funniest experiences I had. Don't get me wrong, the funeral was sad. In general, funerals tend to be sad. However, in this funeral in particular, it was really interesting seeing how people were acting. On one side of the room, we had the people who were filling the room with tears. Then we had the people who were like, I really don't know the guy, but I'm here to support you. And then you had me and my siblings laughing because we know that the way the funeral was going was exactly how my grandpa would have not liked. For instance, my grandpa was one of those guys who always said, it's better to have extra rather than missing. But during the funeral mass, the priest decided to go against my grandpa's philosophy. So we were in the mass and suddenly the priest asked, how many people are planning to commune? So the people raised their hands and the priest counted. Then it was time to commune. And the people started to get in line and the priest started handing the Eucharist one by one. And then more people got in line and the priest kept handing the Eucharist one by one. And then more people got in line, and the priest kept handing the Eucharist one by. By the time more people were in line, there wasn't enough of Jesus' body for everyone. I'm pretty sure that my grandpa was screaming from heaven, no! Where's the extra? I taught them one thing, it's better to have extra rather than missing, better to have extra rather than missing, and yet they miss. It was ironic the amount of jokes that came to my mind in my own grandpa's funeral. I even performed a speech. In my speech, I tried to make people laugh to represent his personality. You see. You see, there was no way to actually represent his personality without trying to be funny. Besides, I know my speech made him happier, even after the Eucharist incident. During the funeral process, I realized the importance of having a sense of humor and how comedy humor may be used as tools in our daily lives. That is why I want to encourage you to use comedy humor in your daily lives because, well, we all have a sense of humor and we all enjoy laughing. So let's go back a few months and I'll talk to you how to use comedy humor while we go through my grandpa's funeral process. So I'm standing there in the middle of the wake, not knowing what to do. When someone dies, you don't actually have time to read what to do, say, where, or do in funerals for dummies. So I asked my dad, Dad, what are we supposed to do in a funeral? To which he responded, well, nothing. I mean, you can walk around, talk with people, say your final goodbyes to your grandpa, maybe say some jokes. Wait a minute. Little did my father know of the big mistake he committed when he said the words, maybe say some jokes. So I decided I wanted to say my final goodbyes to my grandpa. So I approached his casket and have my final conversation. Hey, Grandpa, how are you? To which he actually answered. And I stood there for a minute of dead silence. I'm sharing this with you because this was the first time I encountered myself using humor through the funeral process. Let me go back and explain to you why I say the first time I encountered myself using humor and not comedy. Believe it or not, humor and comedy are two different things. They are similar and they need each other, but they are different. Humor is whatever makes us laugh in any situation, while comedy is every planned action in order to obtain a laughing reaction. With this definition in mind, it is more likely that we recur to humor in more spontaneous moments and we recur to comedy in more planned manners. Let's shift back away of my grandpa's funeral for a bit and talk about where we can use humor in our daily lives. We all been in one of those situations in which you're meeting someone new, and it is awkward because you don't exactly know how to interact with the other person. Like you and the other person are just standing there in the room, trying to avoid eye contact by looking somewhere else in the room, and suddenly your brain starts to play tricks on you, like, hey, down there, pal, do you remember the other person's name? Hey, brain, I don't think they had told me their name already. Oh, they had told you their name. No, they haven't told me their name, or else I will remember. You're not getting it. I'm your brain, and I remember the other person told you their name, but you don't remember their name. Because I'm your brain, and I remember that, but you don't actually remember their name. Really? Because I don't remember it. Oh, you just forgot it. In this point is when you're starting to sweat cold because your brain makes you believe that the other person has already told you their name when in reality they haven't even talked yet. But that awkward situation may be stopped if you just say one joke. Laughing has been proven to have both physical and mental benefits. According to Harvard's medicine school, one of the biggest benefits that you may obtain from laughing is a release of stress and tension, just exactly what we need in this type of situations. So whenever you're stuck in an awkward situation, interacting with the other person, just drop a joke and try to release that tension with a laugh. But let's shift back on my grandpa's funeral and talk about comedy. So the only previous reference I have from funerals were the ones I saw in movies and shows. And in almost all of them, they gave a speech. So I wanted to give my speech. So when I arrived home after the wake, I started writing. I first started writing in a formal way, like, my grandpa was such a great man, and we're so fortunate to have another angel taking care of us from heaven. But I didn't like it. Then I tried a more family-friendly approach, like this stuff, but it didn't seem to work out. And then I realized that maybe I did not know my grandpa well enough in order to write really deep anecdotes about him. My grandpa was also not one of those loving grandfathers who always hugged the grandchildren and told them, I love you. He represented his love in different ways, like this one. I mean, not everyone wakes up at 3:24 a.m. to send a have a good day message to their grandchildren. With this type of anecdotes, I had to work in order to write my speech. The next day, I presented my speech, and it was successful. Wow, Rebe, that sounds incredible, but where does the humor or comedy part comes in this story about your speech? Well, that was my first time in my life writing comedy. Everything I wrote about my grandpa in order to present in his funeral was with the intention of obtaining a laughing reaction. Every word I chose, every anecdote I chose, even the way I interpreted my grandpa were in order to obtaining a laughing reaction. I interpreted my grandpa whenever we were in family gatherings, and he will fall asleep like this. We could be talking about whatever polemic topic was going on, maybe about politics, football, or religion, and he will just be asleep. We will continue on with the conversation like, hey, do you listen to Rebeca's TED Talk? Oh, the one about comedy and humor in funerals? It was so good. I know, right? I learned a lot of things. And suddenly he would speak. He will still be asleep, but he will speak. Nah, didn't like it. Wasn't funny. And she spoke a lot about a funeral. Those ways I chose to interpret him were with intention of obtaining a reaction. But let's shift back again out of my grandpa's funeral and talk where we can use comedy in our daily lives. Comedy comes with more planning, meaning that we can use comedy whenever we have a planned point to say. What I mean by a planned point to say is whenever we're going to give a presentation, or whenever we're gonna give a lecture, or even sell a business product. We all been in one of those classes that could be cool, however, the teacher is determined to make you hate the class. They literally wake up each day thinking, how can I make this class more boring than yesterday? It doesn't matter if you try to pay attention, you just can't pay attention. It's one of those classes that you really, really wish you had the ability of Ferris Bueller to skip class. Trust me, watching all of Adam Sandler's worst movies is better than staying in that class. But, but hey, most of the time when students are not paying attention is because we're bored and you're not engaging. But that doesn't exclusively happen to teachers. It can also happen to business presentations. If you're saying, even if you're trying to sell the best product and the businessman are just saying like, sure, you're not being engaging. If you're giving a school presentation and the students are you're looking at their phone, it's because you're not being engaging. But you can use comedy in order to keep the people engaged. Comedy can help you catch people's attention. Thinking about it this way, we don't associate being funny with something negative. When someone says a bad joke, you will just say, oh, it was a bad joke, or maybe it was way too far, but you will not say that person just committed a crime. So try to use comedy. The worst that can happen is that people don't laugh. Although I really encourage you to use comedy and humor in your daily life as tools, there are some limitations that if we understand them and we know how to use them, we can have an appropriate use of comedy and humor. So let me tell you these limitations. 1, receptiveness of the joke. Maybe a boomer will say, oh, these generations can't handle anything anymore. But there's a rule in comedy that states, if the joke causes more harm rather than more laugh, don't say the joke. If the joke causes more laughter than harm, just take the risk. Sometimes we say jokes and people don't react as we want. They literally look at you as if you just committed a crime, like, that is because maybe your joke was too offensive. But sometimes we'll say a joke that was not offensive at all, and people are just there like, in the punchline, I don't have all day, man, and they don't laugh. That is because not everyone will react as you want to your joke. So have that in mind. 2, jokes need time. The formula for comedy is a mixture of tragedy plus time. Let me give you an example for this one. In my grandpa's funeral speech, I could have said the first joke that came to my mind whenever I saw my grandpa. Hey grandpa, you're looking a little cold in there. But that would have not gone good at all. I can literally picture a random woman who barely knew my grandpa screaming, how dare she to be so disrespectful in her own uncle's funeral. I mean, that woman barely knew my grandpa, and she thinks that he was my uncle, so bad there. But hey, sometimes we just have to wait. I know that my joke was a good joke, but not the appropriate time to say it, and not the appropriate people. So I waited a week and told the joke to my friends. And although they were like, bro, that was way too dark, they were laughing because that's what's a great joke. 3, growing mindset. I recognize that humor and comedy were an essential part for me to go through this process. After all, it helped me shift my perspective towards the whole situation. This may be called a growth mindset. A growth mindset looks to embrace challenges. And while I say this, it doesn't sound like something bad or a limitation. So let me explain why growth mindset may become a limitation when the use of comedy and humor. There's a counter-argument to the growth mindset called a fixed mindset. While the growth mindset suggests that we should embrace those challenges, the fixed mindset looks to avoid those challenges. So sometimes we say, oh, I'm telling this joke because that's my process of coping, but actually you're trying to hide it. So whenever you're going through a situation, you have to recognize, am I actually trying to grow from this situation by using comedy and humor, or I am trying to avoid these feelings? Although I didn't recognize it at the moment, my grandpa had taught me the importance of comedy and humor in my life. After all, his authenticity made him one of the most funniest persons I know. Comedy and humor is part of what makes us humans. And if we use it in our lives, that can help us be more powerful. More humans uses comedy and humor. The world will definitely not be a better place. But hey, at least funerals will be more entertaining. Thank you.